Viewpoints on the Talk Station, FM 107, AM 1240. Ladies and gentlemen, I asked the question of our millennials last week about the issue of the national debt, $22 trillion. And I wondered, did it have any resonance? And not to shame them in any way, shape, or form, their honest answer was, it's not something they can imagine. 22 trillion. What is that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what it is the potential of national disaster. And I'm saying that not to soften the ground for our guest joining us, Marjorie Dufek, the North Carolina coordinator for the Concord Coalition, but rather, and also not necessarily to parrot the concerns of one Congressman Jones, but rather to say, this is an issue that just doesn't get a lot of attention. Marjorie Dufek, Concord Coalition, with us this evening. Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. And how right or wrong am I?
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be with you. I think you are right. And I think that the recent announcement from the General Accounting Office and the Congressional Budget Office that our national debt has hit $22 trillion has generated some, I've seen some political cartoons and some articles about it, which is the first time I've seen any articles in recent history. So that's encouraging. I'm hopeful that it will begin to be more of an issue for the people in Washington that can make a difference. And the way we make that happen is all of us have to make sure that they know it's important to us as voters.
Well, now, here's the twist to all of this. This national debt has been accommodated by a law that allows the federal government to continue to go, well, pretty much on a spending spree. There's used to require both a congressional as well as administrative approval to raise the debt limit, the cap. We don't have that anymore, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true.
Well, I mean,
one of the challenges, however, with that constant, it's a rule that they put in place, hoping that it would cause them to discipline themselves.
Right.
And they found that every year, essentially what they did was they would just vote for a new debt limit. So It really wasn't accomplishing its objective, and it was making the markets worry, and they had to had this panic every year when that was happening. So I'm not sure that I worry so much about the whether we have a formal debt limit or not, but we need our congressional representatives to begin to be realistic and recognize that our budget, our current federal budget, structurally is not in a sustainable position. The Government Accounting Office has warned us that unless changes are made, there are deficits as far as the eye can see because there are so many things in our budget that are on automatic pilot.
All right. Now, there are several other aspects. I'm about to create a downer here on President's Day and a variety of questions for you very quickly. Marjorie Dufek with us, Concord Coalition, and I'm going to get her to share with us the organization and her participation in it in just a moment. We're looking now at the highest delinquency rate for car loans. We've seen a major increase in debt for college students. We're seeing a decline in ownership of real estate. All of these contrasting a booming, quote, economy, a booming Wall Street. Marjorie, I know that I'm not sure what your background is relative to economics, but much of this just really doesn't equate. It doesn't balance out. And I'm looking at the growing debts. I'm wondering, as someone said in an article recently, in a Washington Post article, how do you square those circles?
We have gotten very comfortable with debt.
Okay.
In society.
Good point.
And I think we've even been encouraged, that it's something that can grow the economy, and it can. There are times that it makes sense to borrow so that you can have future return. It makes sense to borrow a little bit of money to be able to go to college because, in theory, you will increase your earning power. However, it may not make sense to borrow $100,000 to do so.
Right.
And and the cost of college has become sort of outrageous, and people are borrowing lots of money for that. It may make sense to borrow a home when a home value is going to go up, but it doesn't make sense to borrow beyond your ability to repay.
Right.
Well, so I think debt in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's what's the challenge with our federal debt is that it is such a high percentage of our current gross national product,
mm-hmm.
and that's at a time when we're not in a major worldwide war, and at a time when our economy is relatively healthy. It would be different if we were trying to goose the economy and get it going, but the economy is in pretty good shape right now.
Right, that's true.
So there really isn't any reason, any justification for us to be incurring a deficit.
Well, amidst all of this, of course, it takes political willpower. Let's talk about the Concord Coalition and about Marjorie Dufek as North Carolina coordinator. What is the purpose of the Concord Coalition?
We are an educational organization.
Okay.
What we do is go around the state and the nation talking to citizens and doing various exercises. I talk to Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and civic organizations and students, and there are a variety of things that we do to help people understand the situation that we are in. We don't take a position particularly on what changes should be made. Our position is that our citizenship needs to be more educated about the situation we're in so that they pressure our elected officials to do something about it.
Well, speaking of elected officials, recent piece sent to us by your organization in which it's noted Representative Walter Jones was a strong advocate for fiscal responsibility, and my reason for chatting with you this afternoon is about that news release. The fact that Congressman Jones was such a fiscal hawk for all intents and purposes. My question is this a concern that his voice was one of the few, and is there a need, shall we say, to, well, educate or politic, for want of a better description, lobby with future candidates for that position?
Absolutely. I think we should be asking all of us should ask every candidate for the United States House and United States Senate about what their position is on the budget. We continue to dig a deeper hole, and of course, that when you're digging a hole, the first thing you've got to do is stop digging the hole.
Right.
and we are continuing to. We're not stopping. We're growing the debt. So every year.
Well, the other challenge with this, Marjorie, and again, Marjorie Dufek with us, the Concord Coalition, is the fact that politicians don't get elected by saying no to their constituents.
That's right. And that's why we feel like this education is so important, is that, the bottom line is there aren't a lot of easy answers here. It's not a matter of just, making a few tweaks and it's all going to be fine. There are structural problems in the debt that we have to face. There are things in the budget that are not voted on every year by Congress.
Right.
Things like Social Security and like Medicare. And boy, if any congressperson says I'm going to touch those, everybody goes crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the third rail, and the reason why it's called the third rail is where the electricity flows.
That's right. And when the Social Security, for example, was put in place way back when, the average life expectancy was 63. So getting a retirement benefit of 65 worked pretty well. There were some people that didn't even live long enough to get it.
Right.
And there were more people working per worker collecting Social Security. Now, 60 years on, we have more than that. We have a situation where there are fewer workers for every person retired, and there are people like me who are getting ready to retire, and I can expect, hopefully, to live 20 years. And that means that there's 20 years of Social Security that I'm going to collect. The system, frankly, was not designed for that.
Marjorie, though, the question goes to how do you convince Washington? And furthermore, talking about the millennials, every Thursday evening from 6 to 7, I talk to a group of, young voters, folks between the ages of randomly 23 and 40. Mm-hmm. And they themselves can't get their minds around, and I'm talking about folks with an education, with college education. The term 22 trillion doesn't mean anything to them.
No.
And I would say to the voters, getting that to mean something is nearly impossible. And to the representatives, the elected officials, as a result, there's really no compelling reason to make life difficult for folks.
I think the most compelling reason, particularly for millennials, is, folks like us, their grandparents are spending their inheritance.
Right.
There is so much that is now being paid in interest in the federal budget. The last year, the interest on payments was something like $320 billion. No.
Well, that's billion. I mean, we're talking trillion. Billion's just pocket change. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. But yeah. I'm sorry, it's $300 trillion. Really?
No, 300 billion.
300
sorry,
billion.
I'm getting my zeros mixed up. But that's a lot of money that could be spent for lots of other things, and it's just interest. It's just going up in smoke. And we've had the advantage of low interest rates in the last few years.
Right.
So that interest, as interest rates begin to go up, if they do, that interest amount, continues to increase. So we're not even getting anything for all the money that we're spending. And the thing that worries me is that our automatic expenditures are now over 64% of the budget.
All right, Marjorie, before we wrap it up, let's look at the background, the history of Congressman Walter Jones, your observations on that. And then finally, the need to, not only in the case of this race, but races across the country, how do you get the attention of those elected officials? To give credit to Congressman Jones, it was a topic that he and I discussed every time. I may want to talk about the next moonshot, but he invariably got into the issue of the national debt.
Yeah. He cared deeply about it.
Yeah, he was very focused on getting that message out. I don't see that in many other members of Congress, simply because they're caught up in Russia investigations and situations in Europe and what have you. But I don't see them having the energy or focus that Congressman Jones had.
I don't either. He was a visionary in this topic. However, we can make a difference by citizens constantly bringing it up.
Okay.
My personal experience has been our elected representatives are very responsive to calls and letters. Okay. And if we start writing lots of letters and making lots of phone calls saying, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about this? Just as you said, every time you talked to him, he brought it up. Mm-hmm. That's what we need to do. We need to talk to our representatives and bring it up. And once they realize that this has got us fired up, they will begin to talk about it. But right now they think they don't have to.
Marjorie Dufek with us again, the organization, the Concord Coalition. All right. Little shameless self-promotion here on your behalf, Marjorie. What about the Concord Coalition? What are you looking to do?
I would love to have the opportunity to speak to organizations or to run our federal budget exercises where groups of people get together and try to figure out for themselves what changes they would make. Or you can go online on our website, and there's an online way to see if you could balance the budget. And that's concordcoalition.org.
Okay. Stay with me. I'll talk to you about that. Maybe we can do something with that with the radio station.
You bet.
Marjorie Dufek with us. Marjorie, the Concord Coalition, you're the North Carolina coordinator. Are you working to build new organizations across the state? Well,
essentially what I'm doing is trying to recruit volunteers that want to help me spread the word and speak to as many people as they can so that we can expand our voice.
Marjorie Dufek with us this evening. Marjorie, stay with me. Thank you very much for joining us here on Viewpoints on the Talk Station FM 107 AM 1240. Right after the bottom of the hour news break, we're going to chat about the issues of elections. Stay with us.